Thank you everyone for joining us. This is Blue Marble Week. It is the first of a series of 12 events that will all feature marvelous thinkers in the field of space infrastructure. Our next speaker is one of those marvelous thinkers. And with that, I would like to introduce Negar Feher. Her experience in the field of space spans many years. She holds a bachelor's of science from Cal Poly Pomona in aerospace, aeronautical, and astronautical engineering, and a master's in aerospace engineering from Stanford University. Negar is VP of Business Development for Momentus Space. Momentus focuses on providing the infrastructure services necessary to usher in the coming era of space-based prosperity. With in-space transportation as their core service, they are laying the tracks for a robust, thriving economy just a few hundred kilometers overhead. Momentus was recently valued at over $1 billion, for good reason. They are the early leaders in the industry, and there's a lot of potential in untapped business. Infrastructure is key. Please, Negar.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. I'm going to share my screen, and if you could just verify that you guys can all see what I'm saying. Good afternoon, everybody. I guess most of you are on the East Coast, and for those on the West Coast, good morning. I'm going to talk to you today about the infrastructure services we need for an industry beyond Earth. So our vision at Momentus is a future where humanity is equipped with everything it needs to flourish throughout the solar system. And the mission that we have in order to enable this is to provide the infrastructure services that are going to support all the industry beyond Earth. Right now is a great time in the space industry for investments, for new space companies to come in because of all the investment that's coming in. There's about a $2.7 trillion space industry that's consistently growing, even in this time of peril during the pandemic. A lot of new space applications are coming on board. You know, you can see the space tourism industry flourishing, space manufacturing, like Rob was talking about earlier, on-orbit servicing. We're going to pretty soon see data centers moving to space and space power. And what we believe is that as the space industry develops, it'll naturally over time want to become less and less dependent on Earth and want to extract more and more resources in space. So have the energy generated in space, have the construction materials mined in space and used, and find more and more raw materials there. So we like to call this in situ resource utilization. Oh, I wonder why. Oh, okay. Sorry. So our initial business model is basically, last mile delivery in space. I like to typically call it like connecting flights in space at Momentus. And what that means is, the first leg of the flight is the rocket, and then the second leg of the flight is the orbit transfer vehicle. And just like a connecting flight on the ground is always cheaper than a direct flight, we're just using that same business model. So what you can see here is an example of, a rocket where we integrate our vehicle with a bunch of payloads on board. And once we're separated from the rocket, we go and we transport each one of these individual payloads, which are individual fully functioning satellites, to a very specific orbit. Once we're done with that, we either deorbit our vehicle or use it as a hosted payload platform for other payloads. And basically, in-space transportation is just the beginning. We really see ourselves as an infrastructure company. But the first step in order to enable all the infrastructure necessary in space is transportation. And hence why, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos started with rockets. That's not their end game. That's just the beginning in order to enable people to go to space. So once the transportation problem is solved, we intend to, like I mentioned, offer hosted payloads and satellite as a service to enable more people who might not be as savvy about, building satellites and launching satellites, enable them to launch their payloads to space. A lot of researchers would love this. And we already have customers for this, such as Caltech, who are experimenting with new solar cell technologies, with new wireless power transfer technologies, kind of as a stepping stone to eventually having, big power generation centers in space that beam power back down to Earth. Data processing is another thing I mentioned earlier, and moving a lot of these to space makes a lot of sense. In-orbit servicing is another thing. A lot of companies are working on this right now. We've seen some successes with the MEV and other vehicles already, and we believe this to continue to grow, and we intend to play in this space as well. And eventually, all these satellites will need to be deorbited, so that's another service that we intend to offer. So in summary, just to make sure we're all starting off this on the same page, we see Momentus as a transportation and infrastructure services company, not necessarily a propulsion or hardware company. So the key word here is service. And we believe that this is one reason for a lot of our success. We're not just building and selling hardware. We operate it for our customers, and we provide like a full gamut of services around that. So now I'm going to go into the market and the service model for space a little bit. So one of the major enablers for the future of space is going to be transportation. And if you look about it historically, for any industry to thrive, you need the cost, capabilities, and reliability of transportation to be there. So look at the steam engines. Those led to industrialization. Think of the turbine and the aviation industry, which created tourism. Or one of the most recent ones are optical fiber and, offering internet from space and building spacecraft that can enable that, proliferated the offering of internet around the world. I mean, there's still billions of people that don't have it, but you can see how, creating these transportation enablers enabled the whole industry. So the trends in space transportation start with, looking back at 2010, you can see that we started with mid-sized rockets, where we're flying up to, 70 satellites in that time frame. And they were like more in the larger class. And you fast forward to 2019, you can see that now we're flying like 500 satellites. There are a mix of small satellites and large satellites. And if you go another 10 years forward, we anticipate this number to double. We're looking at thousands of satellites launched on very big, large, heavy rockets, as you can see here. And the majority of the mass of the space is going to not just be one satellite per launch like it was 20 years ago. Now we're looking at maybe 20 satellites or 30 satellites that are going to go up on each one of these rockets, because no one satellite is going to be big enough to take the 50 to 150 tons of capacity that New Glenn and Starship and others are going to have. So this is naturally causing a disruption in the market. If you look at the cost per kilogram of launch back, 50 years ago, it was like $8,000 to $10,000 a kilogram. And, 10 years ago, it dropped in half, thanks to the likes of SpaceX, it was down to $4,000 a kilogram. And in the next year, we anticipate that this cost is going to continue to come down to the likes of potentially down to $2,000 a kilogram. And eventually, when Starship and New Glenn are available, we anticipate that the cost to be as low as $500 a kilogram. And when you look at the rockets getting larger and larger, then basically there's not going to be one satellite that's going to be able to take up all of the capacity. So that's why you're going to need this last mile in space delivery to transport all these satellites effectively to where they need to go. And if you look at the comparison between the solution for this problem, you can either add an upper stage booster like a Fragart, like Soyuz does, or Rocket Lab does, Photon, or other launch vehicles are looking at upper stages. But the problem with the upper stage typically is that the upper stage can transport a bunch of satellites just to another orbit, and they're all at the same orbit, and they can't necessarily change some of the orbit parameters that you would need for like a constellation. So if you compare that to an orbit transfer vehicle, that one has the benefit of being able to put multiple of these on top of a rocket. Instead of just one upper stage booster, you can have like 4 transfer vehicles on your rocket. And then each one can transfer each one of the satellites in a constellation to a very specific longitude of the sending node or RAN, or a very specific inclination. And you will have enough power and delta V to enable this to happen in that type of a configuration. Now, if you think about the market, it's a very large market. And the small sats alone are one of the biggest growing markets. You can see here from some charts we got, I believe this is from NSR's report, the estimated total addressable market for LEO is anticipated to, continuously double in size up to $1.5 billion by 2024. And the number of satellites launched with, that we categorize as a small sat, anything less than 500 kilograms, grew 3 times over the past 3 years. So it's a very large market that will continue to grow and expand, and it will continue to be enabled by all the new launch offerings as well. And the market isn't just the small sat market, it's also the geosynchronous market, the medium Earth or orbit market, and beyond. Deep space and lunar market is a big market as well. And you can see the statistics on how these markets are going to continue to grow over time too. So now I'm going to go into a little bit about our products and technologies. So what you see here is Momentus's roadmap. We start with Vigoride, which is enables you to fly small sats to low Earth orbit. Vigoride could also do GTO to geo transfers as well. And like I showed you earlier, the addressable market for the small sats, is up to $1.5 billion. And we are starting to fly these vehicles as early as January of next year. So in a month, we're going to start flying this one. We have, for example, on the first mission, we have about, I believe, 17 customers that are already integrated, and we're shipping to launch base this week. So we're very excited about Vigoride. And the offering is going to be on a quarterly basis. So we have at least 4 flights next year. We're looking at potentially 6, up to 6. And then in 2022, it's going to go beyond that. For Arteride, we are going to start offering this in the second half of 2022. We can do, payloads potentially up to 4 tons on this, even though the chart says 2,500 kilograms. This one, we have customers that have signed up to go to the moon. You can take anything from a small 6U CubeSat up to a 2-ton satellite on this vehicle. You can kind of think of it as a replacement for the ESPA ring. And the addressable market for these type of missions to MEO, GEO, HEO, and lunar is about $10 billion. And eventually in 2024, we'll be offering Fervoride, which could take like 5 to 15, maybe even 20 tons. And this could be transporting, deep space, lunar habitats and things of that nature. And you can see our product line over time grows to kind of match the maturation of the launch vehicles and the growing trend in terms of the payload volume available in the launch vehicle fairing. You can find the data sheet for Vigoride, our orbit transfer vehicle for LEO, on our website. This is just giving you a little screenshot here. It'll show you the available volume in an ESPA Grande ring, on a dedicated small launch vehicle, and some estimated trip times for various types of missions. Or you're welcome to talk to me if you have any questions about this type of service. So what's the differentiator? So why Momentus, and why not anybody else? One of the key technologies that we've developed is called microwave electrothermal propulsion. It basically runs on water as a propellant. We chose that because, one, the most important reason was because it's an in-situ resource that we can eventually mine in space. And we will be able to continue to operate and refuel our vehicle in space by use of this as a propellant. This technology is also throttleable. What that means is we can vary the thrust in ISP in order to adjust the trip time to whatever our customers need for a particular mission. The efficiency of this kind of a system is 2 to 5 times more than that of a chemical system. And in terms of the trip time, we are faster, about 2 times faster than any other kind of electric propulsion system. And we provide a lot of thrust as a result. Just to tell you a little bit about how the propulsion technology works is you have a resonant cavity. And what we do is we inject water vapor on one end and we emit microwave energy onto it. And once the microwave energy interacts with the water, it basically turns it into a plasma that we then put through a converging diverging nozzle in order to generate thrust. So we're able to generate a lot of thrust with this technology. This just kind of shows you, how we enable low-cost flights. We have a very simple design. You can see the water tanks where we integrate the CubeSats on top, and the payload deck where we could put microsats on the very top. We use solar arrays for generating power, and we use that power for generating the microwave energy we need to run our propulsion systems. We have attitude control thrusters, so we have full 3-axis control. Those run on water as well. We don't use any expensive components, and we're not single string. We're actually, we have a lot of redundancy built in, so to increase reliability as well. Here you can see some images of some hardware. This is our initial thruster. It was an X-band thruster that we flew last year on our first mission called El Camino Real. We're going to be flying the C-band thruster beginning next year, which can offer higher thrust and efficiencies, and then eventually the S-band thruster as well. And these kind of scale in terms of the ISP and thrust available in order to enable us to have delta Vs that vary from 1 to 2 kilometers per second up to 5 to 6 kilometers per second. Here you can see the X-band and the C-band and S-band thrusters firing under vacuum. And just one cool fact is you can see the plume coming out. Those colors are actually what inspired us to develop our brand colors that you can see on the little logo of Momentus. It's basically the colors of water as it transitions into a plasma. Here you can see that we have very low technological risk. We have a very simple structure. We've tested the engines in space already, like I mentioned on our El Camino Real mission, and we've done a lot of ground testing. We buy solar panels from a heritage supplier who's flown solar panels in space. We have a lot of experience in-house from our team developing avionics, and we buy high heritage system deployers such as those offered by ISI Space and others who have developed deployers. So what our ultimate goal is to lower the risk as much as possible in order to give our customers as much confidence that this vehicle will deliver them safely to the destinations that they need. So that's why we're estimating, the total success rate to be greater than 93%, as we use proven rockets such as SpaceX, which have a very high success rate, around 97%. We have deployment systems that have 100% success rate on orbit, which leads to a very high success rate and low risk. Now I'm going to go into some of our business models. So we have various types of services. Charter, just like you can imagine, like you charter a bus, and it's just for you. We offer a similar kind of service where the customer can come and buy one of our services for transfer vehicle all to themselves. And basically they get 100% of the payload capacity, which could be 200 to 300 kilograms of payload on a Vigoride, for example, or more if they're in a dedicated launch vehicle. And this comes at a fixed price. We can procure the launch for the customer as well. And we can even operate the satellite on orbit if they want to just bring a payload to us in a hosted payload type of configuration. So you can imagine somebody, for example, who wants to do a BIU in GEO, like a bring into use scenario where they have to have the satellite in a particular orbit in GEO by a particular time in order to save their license, this would be a good service for them, because we can book a dedicated launch that would go whenever we need it to, provide a dedicated service to this customer, and ensure that they keep their filing with the ITU. Shuttle service is the alternative, where similar to rideshare service that you get on a launch vehicle, you can think of it as multiple customers sharing the ride on our vehicle. So we would buy a rideshare slot on a launch vehicle such as SpaceX, which we have already. We have 6 slots procured with them. And then we would put a bunch of payloads on board our vehicle, and then we would launch them together. And once we're in orbit and separated from the launch vehicle, we would go and we would transport each one of these satellites to a very particular orbit that they need. We can change the altitude, we can change the inclination, we can change the longitude of the ascending node or RAN if it's a mid-inclined orbit, and phase the satellites about so that you can launch a whole constellation of CubeSats or multiple microsats on our vehicles at once. And it enables you to hop on more launches that may not be the precise, let's say morning or LTDN that you needed, or it may not be the precise altitude or inclination that you want, and we can make those adjustments for you. Here's a little case study in terms of what a customer would do in the event that they needed to get, let's say, an 11 a.m. LTAN orbit. So, and they have 2 50-kilogram satellites, and they're just trying to get to this final orbit. So the first option is to buy a dedicated rocket from, let's say, Rocket Labs or Virgin. And in that scenario, it could be, $6.5–7 million. The second alternative is to do a rideshare. So they would book their own slot, let's say with SpaceX or on a Soyuz or another launch vehicle, and then fly propulsion systems on board in order to enable them to have the high delta V necessary to make the LTAN shift from, let's say, the standard 9 a.m. orbit that the launch vehicle would drop you off to the 11 a.m. orbit, which could require a significant amount of delta V. So you need a beefy propulsion system. So that might cost you around $5 million if you account for the launch cost and the propulsion system cost and everything else for the 2 satellites. Then the last alternative is if you were to use a Vigoride on a shuttle service. So you ride share with others. So I said you can have 200–300 kilograms on each Vigoride. You would take a third of the capacity on the Vigoride. And then the Vigoride would transport you from the 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. using precession on our vehicle Vigoride, which has a very high delta V. So we would enable you to get to that LTAN probably faster than you could with your own propulsion system. So basically, we are at least, multiple factors cheaper than the alternatives that the customer have today. I'm very proud to say that from when I joined the company about 2 years ago, we were only 5–6 people. Now we've grown to about 100 people. Unfortunately, due to COVID, I can't show you a picture of everybody. But this is an older picture of our fabulously diverse and incredibly talented team, which is still growing. So we're still hiring if anyone's interested. We have people that come from various universities, including Stanford, Caltech, UCLA, and with experience from NASA, Maxar, JPL, SpaceX, Blue Origin, etc. And we have people who have founded companies in the past who have decided to join our team as well. And we're very proud of the team we've managed to put together. We have customers from all over the world. You see all the areas highlighted in pink. We call that pink color plasma magenta at Momentus, is where all of our customers come from. I believe we have, I want to say over 25 customers now. You can see some of the logos from them. NASA is flying their Tropics Pathfinder mission with us next year. Caltech is flying a hosted payload, like I mentioned earlier. Canadensis is flying payloads to the moon for the Canadian government. We have Lockheed Martin, who's doing a NASA tipping point with us, where they're doing cryogenic refueling payload hosted on one of our Vigorides, and numerous constellation customers such as Kepler, and we have integrators like ISIS, other hosted payload offers like Sat Revolution and EnduroSat as well. So they're all entrusting us to fly with us, which is I'm honored to have all of these people on board, and I hope that the list continues to grow. This shows you a brief on our launch manifest. Like I mentioned, we flew El Camino Real end of, summer of last year in July. It was around July 4th. And then we have another demo. It's showing here end of this year. Unfortunately, the launch got postponed a couple of weeks. So now it's middle of January. Then we're going to have another demo in June of Vigoride, where we're going to demonstrate all of the Vigoride capabilities, from altitude change to phasing and plane changes and other type of services that we intend to offer. And we're going to start offering fully commercial, flight proven services starting in September of next year. So we have customers booked then, and also in December of 2021. And in fact, we have multiple Vigorides booked because the demand was so high for that quarter. And starting in 2022, we're actually going to increase our cadence from 4 Vigorides to potentially 8, 10, maybe even 12, and start flying Arteride in the second half of 2022 as well. I already spoke a little bit about El Camino Real. This is a beautiful picture of our team that built it, and basically designed, built, flew to prove the microwave electrothermal propulsion system works in space in 6 months. It was incredible effort, and it was great to see the satellite up in orbit and to get some data back down from it. And I'm going to end with a little video. While I'm trying to figure this out, let me just move on to questions. I'm sorry for all the technical difficulties I've been having with my laptop today.
No worries. Don't worry about that, Negar. Thank you very much. Really, really interesting conversation. I'd like to start some of the Q&A talking about the business behind this business, right? I love the technology. You know that I'm a big fan. I wouldn't have asked you here if I didn't think y'all really, really had something remarkable that was worth sharing. I would like to know why you think you're growing so fast. I mean, I think the answer is pretty obvious, but I'd like to hear from you why you think you're growing so fast.
So I think it's because we have a great visionary and CEO. Mikhail is somebody who has started multiple billion-dollar startups in the past and sold them. And
wait, I want to be clear: $1 million startups or $1 billion startups?
$1 billion.
That's what I thought you said. I just wanted to hear that one more time.
Yeah, he's a very inspiring, charismatic, visionary that naturally attracts a lot of people to brilliant minds to work with him, and he just is a great leader and sets a vision that everyone can stand behind and work hard to achieve. He sets really hard goals. A lot of people have called him like the Elon Musk of Russia. So you can think of him in that sense. So with a combination of him, and then we have a lot of great talent that we've hired in our leadership, including people like Fred Kennedy, who used to lead DARPA and founded SDA and other organization, is our president now. We hired Rob Schwartz from Maxar, who used to be the CTO there, to kind of help in terms of developing our roadmap, and numerous other people like they have just really managed to kind of push us into this road to success. We've always been very aggressive, trying to be as customer friendly as possible. And I would say, like, one of the key things is focus. You know, one of the key things I learned personally from Mikhail is, you know, to prioritize and focus on the most important thing. A lot of startups, you know, they say they're going to do one thing, and then they consistently pivot and do other things and other things, and you lose a lot of time in that. From our inception at the end of 2017 to now 2020, you know, I've been with the company for 2 years, from when we raised seed to now when we're intending to go public. It's very fast for a startup, especially in space, to go from, you know, seed to public in 2 years. So I think it was just the ingenuity of the team, the focus on the business objectives, and being flexible in order to kind of move with the market. So, for example, when we initially designed Vigoride, we had like Vigoride Extended, we had all these other products. We were very focused, hyper-focused on transportation, but as the launch market kind of changed and kind of followed the trends we were expecting, like I was showing earlier with the launch prices, right, we kind of tweaked all of our product lines to kind of align well with that. And you can see the whole market kind of adjusting. So you can see people with microsats who used to build them to be less than 100 kilograms now growing the size of their satellites because the launch cost has reduced so much. You see people who used to want to fly like 1Us upgrading to 3Us or 6Us and 12Us, and even microsats becoming more and more prevalent than CubeSats. And we looked at that and we kind of grew the size of our platform to be able to accommodate that. So Vigoride went from being able to accommodate 100 kilograms of payload now to being able to accommodate 300 to 700 kilograms of payload. So we've been very agile in terms of our product development and ensuring that what we develop is a great product market fit for the market. And what enabled us to do this is having people that trusted us and early adopting customers that kind of guided us here too, to say, hey, we really want this, and listen very well and make sure that our services align with the needs of the market.
So fascinating journey. I would like to dig a little further on that. You are, as far as I'm aware, the fastest growing space company that I personally know of. Now, there's some great companies we've had yesterday, and we got some more later today, and we've got some more coming in tomorrow. But you know, you left a pretty solid job at Maxar. You'd been there for a long time. Mm-hmm. Space people do not tend to be very risk tolerant, right? We do risky things, but as who we tend to be, there tend to be, you know, solid engineering that has triple redundancy if you can, right? So, so you took personally, you took a really good job that was, you know, you were quite satisfied with, and took a risk on this new industry, and it is a new industry. So then you saw it go from a few people, less than 10, to nearly 10 times bigger in just 2.5 years. The market obviously thinks you're doing something right. Otherwise, there wouldn't be this special purpose IPO. So talk about what made those things happen, right? Keep in context that our meeting here the last couple of days, yesterday and tomorrow, is really focused on space infrastructure and transportation, about the meat and potatoes, if you will. So how did this all evolve? Take us into it a little bit. We got plenty of time. We're going to take some questions. We've got about 20 minutes, so I want to kind of dig into this in depth. Okay.
Yeah. So, you know, just answering the first part of your question, why did I decide to leave Maxar?
Yeah.
It was funny. While I was at Maxar, I was when I was recruited to Momentus, I was working in our product strategy group, and I was actually responsible for figuring out what our diversification strategy would be and how we would be moving into the small sat market to address this growing market. And we had some successes at the time. You know, we were building the Skybox satellites for them, and we were building some satellites for, you know, people like Facebook and others. So we were trying to figure out how to grow that. So I kind of stumbled upon Momentus and Mikhail in the process of looking at that market. And I met him about a year before I actually joined Momentus. And it's funny, the story. He told me about what he was doing and how he had this lab and he was building a propulsion system that ran on water. And I totally poo-pooed his idea. I said, this is never going to work. Like, oh, good luck with that. Like, oh, great, another propulsion company. Like, we don't need that. There's too many already on the market and they're all struggling to survive. Why are you building another one? And yeah, so I was totally very negative towards him. And I'm surprised that he talked to me again after that meeting. About a year later, he's like, oh, Negar, like, check out what we've done now. And I went and I checked out their lab, and they had already developed the propulsion system. You know, we're building the prototype ready to fly it. And I was just kind of in shock. I was like, oh, wow, like, you actually did this. And we had a lot of conversations, and he was basically getting in the process of going through Y Combinator, which was I think one of the keys to help accelerate us. It's one of the best accelerators there are. And you know, I was talking to him about how I think we shouldn't sell our propulsion systems and we should just offer services and just focus on the service industry. And that's how we would be able to make the maximum amount of profits and, you know, ensure that we can constantly develop this technology to make it better. And we all agreed, and he's like, okay, and he pitched it. And at Y Combinator, we were able to raise through them at the end of that accelerator an $8 million seed round, which was one of the biggest seed rounds in our batch.
Yep.
And then after that, we proceeded to, you know, grow the company. So we grew the company at that point to like 10 people. And then after that, we started, you know, building and developing all the different services that we were offering. And by the time we were ready to raise our Series A last year, I believe we raised around $25 million and grew our team from, you know, the 10 people to around, you know, 30, 40 people, and then it doubled to 70 people. And then once we closed our bridge round after the Series A, you know, we grew to like 90 people. And here we are today, close to 100. And with the intentions, hopefully by early next year, if the merger of being approved with SRAC to go public. So I think we were very conscious on our spending, conscious on our growth rates. I know people will be like, oh my God, you guys like just hired so many tons of people. It wasn't like overnight, you know, it was gradual. It was funny. I was talking to some, you know, potential intern candidates, and I was telling them how, you know, this past year, we had 20 interns and maybe like 80 employees. But the year before, we had 10 employees and 10 interns. So we doubled the number of our staff with the number of interns. And we were all freaking out like, oh my God, how are all these interns going to be able to do anything? And they actually did more than we did. It was crazy. Like, we ended up hiring a bunch of them, and it was amazing. So it's been an amazing journey. And I've learned a ton. I want to say I learned more in the past 2 years at Momentus than I did in 13 years working at SSL. And not to say anything bad about SSL and Maxar. It was a great company to work with. I learned a lot there, but it's just the pace at which you work at a startup is just incredible. And the amount of learning that goes into it, the amount of effort and the number of hours, and everybody works incredibly hard. So I think that was it. And then, you know, yeah, I think the main thing is Mikhail's leadership. And, you know, he's great at, you know, detecting talent and hiring talents. And I mean, he hired Fred about a month or two ago, and I was kind of shocked. I'm like, wow, the old head of DARPA and SDA wants to be our president. That's amazing. Like, and he's great too. He's such a visionary, and I love working with him. And he's like rolls his sleeves up and gets right in there with us. It's not like, oh, you know, go talk to my staff. It's like, no, okay, what's the problem? Let's all put our heads together and solve it. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
No, it does exactly what I was looking for, right? I was kind of looking for the story and the evolution. We've been asking all of our panelists, speakers, to kind of imagine what the near future looks like, right? So you show some of the slides, the market's going like this. Access to orbit has never been easier, right? Never, ever been easier. So what if there were a lot of, I know Mikhail does not like the phrase space tug, but I'm an old gray-haired white guy, so I like space tug. I actually think it's a really evocative phrase. But if there were a lot of space tugs, what changes do you see of the cislunar econosphere, right? You know, y'all are going to do it. There's some other stuff. Lockheed Martin's got some stuff going. Our next guest, Daniel's going to be talking about space tugs. So we've gotten pretty good at the first part, the hard part, just getting to orbit anywhere, right? And a lot of folks are taking any ride they can get, right? But they're not going to the place they want to go. So imagine a world, imagine a cislunar econosphere where there's a lot of capacity to do that last mile. What does that look like?
I think it becomes a more efficient system. You know, think of the difference between everyone driving their own car on the freeway versus, you know, people riding buses. Think of the traffic you get from everyone riding their cars versus riding a bus. It's going to be the same situation eventually in space, you know, in LEO, in the cislunar atmosphere as well. Like, we will be able to enable people to get to where they need to get more efficiently and more cost effectively, just like public transportation. And sometimes public transportation is not as fast as, you know, riding on a jet, of course. And it's going to be the same thing with space tugs. You know, if you're on a rideshare mission to the cislunar space, you're not going to get there as fast as if you put a big propulsion system on your satellite to get there. So I think what we're going to end up seeing is, you know, tolerance and satellites and structures built that would be able to enable them to last longer trip times through the radiation belts and you know, other atmospheres, harsh atmospheres in space. So people will start designing with that in mind. We'll also see people enabling and building satellites that can be refueled and reused. So going away from this, you know, you just use it and dispose it, you know, disposable mentality to more of a sustainable mentality. So companies like you were saying, like Orbit Fab, Daniel's company, will enable this as well by having fuel depots everywhere. We hope to use fuel depots to reuse our vehicles. We will also, having space tugs and vehicles in space that can repair other satellites will enable longer life. So all the vehicles that you'll see around the cislunar orbits will be able to be there for longer because they'll be able to be refueled, they'll be able to be repaired, and I'm hoping that that will result in less space junk in the long run. So a cleaner space, making it easier for operators to operate in space and not have to worry about all this debris mitigation and constantly moving their satellites because they get, you know, 600 to 1,000 notifications a day of things that are going to hit their satellite in space. And it'll be even more important once we have humans there, because that's an even greater risk. Okay, so an object hits another satellite in space and the satellite deteriorates. Okay, all right, that's bad, you know, more space. But it hits a human, then, you know, we have death, you know. So this problem will only get worse. But with building up technologies such as the ones we're doing and other people are doing for infrastructure in space will enable us to avoid these kind of problems.
That's great. We've been really emphasizing, you know, that 2020 to 2035, the infrastructure pieces are there, and the more that we enable, the better we're going to be. That the better our future becomes by putting all these pieces, these building blocks together. You did mention a piece about your growth and your interns. Yesterday we had a really interesting conversation with Shelley Brunswick, who is the Chief Operations Officer of the Space Foundation.
Right.
And she was really driving home the necessity for workforce development. How do you reach into the schools? How do you, upskill folks? So do you have formal relationships or informal relationships with universities that you kind of recruit from? Or where do these 20 interns come from?
They come to us. I mean, we do work with universities, like we're working with Stanford. They have a rendezvous lab. We're working with, UCLA on launching some satellites for them. And we have a plan to actually help eventually launch satellites for universities, like competitions, to basically help develop the next generation. And we'll be, revealing more information about those type of competitions next year. So we do see workforce as one of the most important things. Like, our people are what make the company, and that's why it's super important that we continue to nurture the future workforce so that we have people to come in and take on the roles that we need. So we have like an intern email on our website where you can email interns at momentus.space if you're interested in working for us. And then we get lots of people very interested. And I'm just amazed at how intelligent and how hardworking our interns are. I'm telling you, sometimes they work harder than we do. And it's amazing how much they actually accomplish. So I highly encourage everybody on the call to hire as many interns as you can. Of course, we pay our interns, and it's a great long-term interview process to see like who's the right fit for what kind of job, and we end up hiring a lot of them at the end. So I think it's not formal relationships; it's actually more informal for us. And we usually go through we have interns that kind of work year round. So we've had some people, for example, some interns from Stanford that have chosen to just basically take a year off from school because of the pandemic and work with us full time. And I'm finding a lot of students opting to, take a pause and just work for a year during this pandemic. And it's great for them. It's great for us. They get a lot of visibility into like all the different types of work that they could be doing, get a lot of good experience, and then they can go back and finish their school. So it's a great time to recruit people from universities. And I love working with universities, and I hope that we will continue to nurture that crowd, and I hope that they like working with us. They're developing some really great technology, so we learn a lot from them as well. And yeah, I feel very fortunate that we're here in Silicon Valley and we're so close to Stanford, so we can just drive over and talk to the professors. And I got my master's there too, so it's nice that I can just go back and chat with those guys whenever.
We actually had a gal who's exactly how you described yesterday on the call. She's a Stanford SSI gal who I'm pretty happy. She's a really bright person that was very articulate, and she was talking about the SSI crowd. So were you part of SSI when you were in school? It predate that.
When I was there.
I don't think so.
No, right? but I was there when Bob Twiggs, who was one of the founders of the CubeSat standard, was teaching there. So I did study under him. But we have recruited from the Stanford Student Space Initiative. I hope I didn't get the acronym wrong. So Grant, one of the guys who's part of that and is building their first Sequoia 3U satellite, is working for Momentus right now. And we talked to the rest of the students on the team as well. So I think they're doing great things. They're working on how to do balloons and developing a lot of cool technologies as it is for sensors to enable eventual, better rendezvous proximity operations in space, which is really relevant and important to us.
So let's cycle back to the things that y'all are doing immediately. So the first thing you're launching is in a few weeks, right? Not the
Yeah.
first thing, the next thing you're launching is in a few weeks. Do you have a date for that? Are you allowed to release that?
Yeah, it's in the middle of January.
Okay.
Um,
Who's your launch provider?
SpaceX.
SpaceX, good.
So we're
Okay.
going to be flying out of the Kennedy Space Center on a Falcon 9 rocket. It's a dedicated rideshare mission, so it means that there's no primary and secondary. Everyone's a secondary on the mission. So we have one of their ESPA slots that we're launching a Vigoride with, like I said, close to 20 different customers on board, a lot of different satellites. It's funny, SpaceX told us that on our port, we had the most number of satellites than any other port. They were kind of getting like a little annoyed, like, oh my God, the amount of paperwork.
Oh, paperwork.
Yeah, so it's exciting that we're enabling so many people to take advantage of these flights. And we have satellites as small as like pocket cubes, which are even smaller than CubeSats, like fractions of a kilogram, all the way up to, things that are much, much larger. So they vary in mass, size, different kinds of deployers, pocket cube deployers, CubeSat deployers, and microsat deployers. So
I didn't realize you could actually handle cargo that small. I thought there was not a mass limit, but adaptability limit. I'm not sure what the right language for that is. But how do you connect with really small, like? I thought you usually worked with larger cargos. I was a little surprised by that.
No, we have Alba Orbital, which is builds these really tiny pocket cubes. I believe they're 250 grams, if I remember correctly. And then they put different like university payloads. So they fly payloads for like universities like Stanford, for startups. Yeah, I know they flew a couple of missions for Stara and some others. And basically this Peapod deployer can fit like 6 different pocket cubes in there, and it's like this 3D printed deployer that they put all the pocket cubes in, and then they deploy it. So they kind of act as a pocket cube aggregator for us.
Okay.
So think of it, there's SpaceX, we're an aggregator for SpaceX, they're an aggregator for us. Just kind of goes down the line.
That's exactly the ecosystem that we're trying to describe this week, right? Right. The first hard part was, let's build some good rockets that are reliable and inexpensive. And all of a sudden you've got hundreds of colleges and some high schools building satellites. So then so once that first hardest obstacle has been managed, and the price for orbit's coming down all the time, now folks like y'all are taking up those holes in the ecosystem, those holes in the market. So you said a little bit about how that changed. The market has changed, that people are actually getting larger satellites because the price for orbit is coming down. Are those satellites, do they have more capability? Are they just being lazy? They're getting bigger stuff now that it doesn't cost as much? I don't think that's the answer.
No. They're growing because the cost of launch is significantly reduced. So they're increasing their power. So for example, the SAR satellites, if they used to be in the 50 kilogram class, going forward, they're going to be in the 100 to 150 kilogram class. And you can see this if you start tracking, SAR providers like Capella, ISI, and Umbra and others, and look at the initial things that they launched versus what they're planning to launch in the future. You could look at Gunther's page and others that kind of track what these people launch. And you can see this gradual increase in terms of mass and capacity, which further, the higher power they're going to have, the better type of images they're going to be able to take and the better data they can extract from it. You're going to see a similar trend in the other types of EO applications like optical imaging and even scientific applications. So like our hosted payload masses for our customers are growing. So if people were originally baselining really small hosted payloads, less than 20 kilograms. Now they're looking at things that are like 40 to 50 kilograms.
Wow.
Because we enable people to fly on our vehicles. We give them up to like a kilowatt of power. So people are trading like, okay, I can spend $500,000 for this 6U and get, you know, this tiny amount of power, or I can spend like $1 million and go on this hosted payload mission and I can get up to a kilowatt of power. So it's like, oh, I could get 10 times, you know, maybe in some cases 100 times the amount of power,
Right.
and my payload can be this much larger. And, you know, the amount of data that they can extract from a platform that allows them greater volume and greater power is so much more than that of a CubeSat. So the CubeSats, I feel over time, as these larger and larger launch vehicles kind of proliferate the market, will be more and more just kind of Pathfinder, you know, let me just get something up cheaply type of missions. And then the follow-on missions that people will start to fly will be larger and larger and larger satellites, so that they can provide better data or get better scientific discoveries, etc. You know, everyone knows the larger the size of your telescope, the better, you know, data you're going to get. So I see that trend happening with even, you know, already within our customer set. They're like, oh, you know, well, I had initially designed this experiment for the ISS and it was supposed to be like 30 kilograms. Now with you, I'm going to make it 50 kilograms and I'm going to throw on all these other things that I can test now because you enabled me to do that cheaper than I could do it on the ISS, less paperwork because it's not a manned mission, and I can get, you know, more power too. So I could, you know, even fly it for a longer duration mission too. So that's what I'm seeing right now. And like I said, we'd like to be a very agile company. So when we see the customers like that, so when we first rolled out, for example, our hosted payload service, we're like, oh, you know, everyone needs like 50 to 100 watts. But then after talking to people, they're like, oh, we could really use like half a kilowatt if you can give it to us. Yeah. We're like, okay, sure, you know, we can make some tweaks to our bus because we already operate on a high power bus. So it's really easy for us to give people more and more power, or, you know, whatever they might need. If they need more volume, if they need more data, whatever it is, we can make tweaks to our platform. And we can, the unique thing is, since we have quarterly launches, we can fly it and test it very, very fast too. So
cool.
That enables us to do that.
So thank you very much. We're going to move on to our next speaker, Lila. Negar, thank you so much for being a part of this. It's fascinating. Please stay in touch. Post your contact information one more time. I saw you did earlier in the chat. And good luck to you. Good luck to you on your upcoming launch. I'm pretty excited to watch that.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So if anyone's looking for a launch and wants to fly with us, please let me know. You can just email me or connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'd love to talk to you more.
Terrific. Thank you. Bye-bye. Lila, over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Negar. That was phenomenal. And yes, thank you for sharing your information, Negar, at momentus.space. That's for all the people listening on YouTube and Facebook Live. So we have a bigger audience than just our group here, which is excellent. I encourage this audience and the other audience to continue to have dialogue in the chats and meet each other however you can. You know, we really want this to be an event to build and nurture this space infrastructure community. So thank you, everybody.